Oh, well, hi, Dave. It's lovely to see you tonight. My
Indeed,
name's
Christian.
Christian McNeill, and tonight I'm interviewing Dave Hill. He is a colleague, another facilitator and coach in the Three Principles paradigm, based in Scotland. And Dave has a particular interest in PTSD, although he works with people from all sorts of different walks of life. Um, Dave, I think it might be easier if I just hand it over to you to say a little bit about yourself rather than me try and praise it possibly inaccurately. So thank
Sure,
you
no
so much
worries.
for joining me tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. Okay, yeah, well, as Christian said, I'm a former soldier. I spent 17 years in the British Army and thoroughly enjoyed it, and thankfully came through it mentally and physically uh, unbroken, which is good. Um, but along that journey, obviously, I worked with a lot of soldiers that have suffered in various different guises, and for the last I've been out of the army now for about 5 years, brief stint working for Amazon, and now working in a financial services firm in Edinburgh. But for the last 6 or so years, so just before I left the army, soldiers of mine had started phoning up asking for help, and I didn't quite know what to do for them other than just to listen, and found that seemed to help calm them down a little bit, and I had no idea why. Um, and yeah, as I say, that just sort of carried on in a fairly ad hoc fashion for the last 6 years. But then 2 years ago, I stumbled across the Three Principles, as people tend to, and it started to make sense as to why listening worked.
Mm.
And I just wanted to learn more and more and more about that to see if I can help even more people. And that's what sort of brought me to being sat here talking to you today.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Great. And just for anyone listening who hasn't come across what we're calling the Three Principles, also known as the Three Principles paradigm or the inside out understanding, um, this is a relatively new, and by that I mean about 4 decades old. It's a relatively new discovery in the field of psychology, which kind of explains how life works in very simple terms. And one of the things that's revolutionary about it is that simply through having a kind of deep understanding of that explanation of life, anyone who that occurs to seems to find life easier. It becomes almost inevitable that they will kind of align themselves with life more comfortably once they have that understanding. So the work doesn't involve any techniques or tools or practices. There's no homework. It's simply in the coming to understand that change occurs, that transformation occurs. And perhaps before you talk more about your work, which I'd love to hear, you could just say a little bit about how this affected you, how stumbling across the Three Principles affected you personally.
Sure, no worries. Well, yeah, about 2 years ago, something happened in my life that sort of turned it upside down slightly. I've always been quite lucky that I've stepped through life quite gently and just enjoyed what I've got around me and been very grateful for what I've got. But about 2 years ago, that sort of got turned inside out. Thankfully, the conversations I've been having with friends with PTSD and various other things made me think about the advice that I would have given them. So I basically gave myself my own advice and sort of said, right, well, you need to go and tell work that you're probably not ready to go back at the moment, and you need to start, making sure you're looking after yourself and just sort of slow down a little bit. That sort of semi-worked. My head didn't slow down very much, but it gave me a bit of a break, and I just sort of allowed myself some time to think and sort of work things through. And on that journey, I read a lot of books. I tried to work out how I'd make myself better, because right at the moment when everything was upside down, I knew I'd be fine. I knew my family would be fine. I just wasn't quite sure how we'd all get there, but I absolutely knew it to my core. That's what kept me going, and I had no idea why I felt like that, but I just knew it. And so I just read lots and lots and lots. And he was reading one book, which has got nothing to do with the principles at all, that I heard something that I've gone back looking for and never been able to find again, which said that thoughts aren't real and I don't have to act on them. And that just made me laugh, which sort of slightly upset the rest of the carriage on the train I was on at the time. But it was an almost instant change in how I felt. I realized that all the uncomfortable thoughts that I was having were being generated by me, and that I didn't have to do anything with them. And that was so freeing. It was unbelievable. I didn't think much more of it at the time, and then was speaking to a friend of mine who's a coach in London. I hadn't realized that he had anything to do with the three principles at that stage. We were just sort of having a general chat. And after about 15 minutes of me explaining the journey that I'd been on, where I'd got myself to so far, and where I was trying to go, he went, "Well, have you heard of the three principles?" And I said, "Nope, what's that?" And he pointed me in the direction of a couple of books and some clips on YouTube, and said, "Well, I think there's something in this that you might resonate with your experience to date, and might help you understand where you've got yourself to and why." And it was just it was the Inside Out Revolution by Michael Neal that I read, and it just rang true with everything that I'd experienced over the sort of previous couple of months. And I was able to peer back into my life and see at various times where I'd been caught on a sort of tricky situation or problem that I thought there was expectation for me to go one way, but I wanted to go the other. And it wasn't until that I'd made that decision that I just needed to go where my heart was taking me, that everything calmed down. Having read and learnt about the three principles a little bit, it made perfect sense why all of that was happening. And I could take that all the way back to childhood. It just proved that the principles are there throughout our lives, even if we don't know about them.
Yeah. And just to interrupt you for a sec, Dave, I thought what occurred to me that is very interesting about what you've been relaying about your life is that in that story, that the history that you've described, you've actually demonstrated just in a few minutes aspects of what this work is pointing to, coming to the fore even in the middle of a crisis. Like I noticed that you said that you sort of you knew that you needed to take some time off work. You were going through this difficult period, and you still knew what you needed, and you took care of that. And I think that's one of the things that we're, when we're working with people, that we're helping them see that there is a part of them that has this infinite wisdom if they're willing to listen to it, this inner voice. And you also knew that both you and your family would be okay. And again, this points to the fact that whatever might be going on now, or whatever might have happened in the past, there is a part of each of us that is simply unbroken, that cannot be broken. And as people come to realize that for themselves, sometimes immediately, as you did there, or sometimes it's more of a dawning realization, it's tremendously comforting. It settles people down. That a sense of security grows from that, and it's almost the ability to be secure, to be settled down even in the face of difficulty. That is one of the things that the three principles is pointing to. And the more people are willing to look for that, and the more they see it. Completely. And then you spoke also of the realizations that you had about the role of thought, that it's that people can take their thinking and their feeling very, very seriously. But the moment you had wherever it came from, whatever inspired it, the moment you kind of saw through that, both the fact that it made you laugh and that it was freeing. Again, it's a very common experience for people who begin to have some kind of grasp of this work. So I think it's, you know, you gave some lovely examples there of what begins to emerge for people.
It's yeah, it was. I could completely see it throughout my life, at every stage, and I just thought, wow, this has so much potential for taking to my friends with PTSD. But what I was very conscious of was that it was my understanding based on stuff that I'd read, and it felt too simple. I loved it because it was simple, but it felt too simple. So that led me off to go and do a course last year, which cured that doubt fairly quickly, as I learned a little bit more and my understanding deepened. And I knew that that it would be, you know, completely beneficial to some of the guys that I've been speaking to, because they've been through, in some cases, you know, 6-7 years worth of differing treatments. Not that any of them are wrong, because some of them do work for some people. And some of them have worked for those individuals, but after a period, it was wearing off. And most of the guys that I've been speaking to have been left in a state where they're, you know, just constantly changing medication as things change in them, and they're living in a sort of state of coping rather than hoping. And that's been quite difficult to sort of see and experience along with them. But the conversations we've been having have been giving that hope back a little bit, and then even more so now that I know, now that I'm not worrying about them, which sounds bizarre. You know, before I would have worried about them and the circumstances, but now I know that they are, you know, that they're perfectly safe already. The only thing that's in their way is their own thought, and by helping them understand that for themselves and bring them back to that baseline of being, of realizing that they're fine, then, you know, that takes pressure off me and makes me more available to them to have that kind of conversation. But, you know, one of the reasons that I thought that this would be, that, you know, an understanding of the principles would be so useful for soldiers is that piece you were talking about earlier, in terms of in moments of complete stress, you can experience complete clarity. And certainly soldiers or service men and women for the last 10 or 15 years with Iraq and Afghanistan and all the rest of it, they've experienced some very, very stressful situations, but will have absolutely experienced that moment of peace and quiet in the middle of all of that, because that's the way we work. You know, our brain kicks in and goes, get rid of all the stuff that's irrelevant, push that aside. You need to focus on this, because this is the thing that's going to get you through the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, and allow you to continue to live. Being able to explain that to someone that's already experienced it and just give them a little bit of reason why that they've experienced that, I think it's going to be quite an easy conversation, and the guys are going to understand it quite quickly. And that's been my experience so far.
Yes, it's funny. A client just asked me today, you know, someone who's been quite touched by this work and has, you know, has found it very helpful, but, you know, was at the stage of, okay, so I've got some questions now. So what about in a war zone? Now, I personally have not been in a war zone, but I have been in car crashes, and I think, you know, that maybe some of the people listening to this recording, you know, will have had that experience, and as well as some of them, I'm sure, will have been in war zones. And exactly that thing of, sometimes it's as though everything slows down, and and the mind is very quiet, very clear, and you kind of know exactly what to do. And there's nothing wrong with you if in such a situation you don't. There's nothing wrong with you if you panic. It just means in that moment your panic thoughts took hold. But the capacity is always there, and it is extraordinary to me. And I would say that in moments of crisis in my life, and I think this is true of many people, more often than not, clarity comes to the fore. The clutter falls away, and you know, that knowing what to do, being focused, and so on, the things that are very much at the front.
No, completely. It's yeah, the knowledge of that and being able to explain that in terms that the person you're having a conversation with might grasp, and that there isn't a preset ordained list of things that you need to tick off to help anybody, makes the whole thing very natural, very flow very easily. And if one part of the conversation isn't working well, a fresh thought will come up in a second that might help, and just see where the conversation takes you. And I think the freedom that gives gives the whole process just makes it so much gentler and authentic. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. You touched on something else that we often we speak about and experience in those of us who work with the three principles, and this concept of listening. I mean, that's hardly new. It's hardly unique to the principles. But I think there is a way that we're kind of introduced to. It's not even introduced to, because I think it's probably familiar for both of us, but it's very much not the active listening thing. And in one of my previous roles, I had a management role, and I would have to do appraisals, and you were actually taught how to do give feedback and do this active listening, which involves a lot of nodding as the other person spoke and using their language back to them, and all of which is really forcing you back into your own head, to sort of nod now, smile
Yes.
now, and all of that sort of stuff. And what we're doing is something very different here. It's just being very sort of quietly present, in as far as possible, just in receive mode, not kind of waiting to get in. And waiting for the pause, or even before the pause comes, to get in. And it reminds me of when my children were small, the way they used to want to listen to a story being read, just kind of a gog. And it's not to trivialize what the person speaking is talking about, but it's the quality of the listening is something of that. And what you touched on, and you'd instinctively kind of come to, that this alone is very helpful for people. And sometimes in a session, if you can do nothing but listen, and the person in the client role will be saying, "That was great, you really helped me." And it's really just that there's something almost magical about that, the quality of that listening, that enables the client to hear, to listen to themselves as well.
Yeah, it's I can remember doing the course during the course last year. We had a session on listening, and the idea was that we listen, not to respond, just see what happens, see where things go. And I spent the whole time thinking, right, come on, you're supposed to be listening. And this the whole scenario was whizzing around in my head. Thinking, this isn't working. What's changed? And I was very aware that I was trying very hard to just listen, and it wasn't working. And then all of a sudden it just clicked. Went, right, this is it. And it is literally that. It is listening not to respond. It's listening to see what shows up, and it doesn't need to show up for you. By being completely there and completely engaged in what each other are saying at that moment in time, creates the space, creates the calm that as a practitioner you're there to try and be in that kind of place, and notice when you're not, and potentially put your hand up and say, sorry, I'm not being of any use to you at the moment. But it's being aware of that, I suppose, in one sense. But by turning up and being completely calm and listening from a place of no judgment and not needing to have to respond to what's being said, that alone is normally enough to help the other person calm down that little bit, from wherever they happen to be in their thoughts, to see things slightly differently. And that's that magic bit you were talking about. It's the opportunity it gives the other person that you're listening to see things slightly differently, or the prospect that they could see things slightly differently, rather than, well, no, this is it. This is how it is. Absolutely, because I've thought it. It's absolutely 100% right. Well, is it? And allowing people to challenge themselves gently and from a sort of curious angle is where you can start to help them break down their understanding of how life's created for themselves, and gives them that opportunity to see it differently, and have a different experience.
Yeah. Lovely. Dave, I wonder if you have an example or of how you might have worked with someone, without breaching any kind of confidentiality. If there's something that just to make it a little more vivid.
Well, most of the people that I've been speaking to, on the whole, have been reaching out from a place of crisis almost. So they are already turned upside down, and are reaching out for help there and then. So having a sort of a deep conversation about how the principles are working is not necessarily the right thing to do at that stage. So it is purely at that stage, and most of it's done over the telephone rather than face to face, because the guys are all over the country. Is just being there and listening and seeing what shows up, and occasionally questioning or seeing how things have changed, because some of these guys I've been speaking to, as I say, for a number of years. So there's one guy I've been speaking to recently, is the one I've been speaking to the longest probably, and he was going, Dave, it's changed. The memory has changed. I said, well, that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Because we are talking about an incident that's 12, 13 plus years ago, and that's, our brain is changing things. It's seeing what it wants to at any one particular time, and it's just throwing ideas out. So it's just saying, well, I'm a bit bored of this one now. Let's see what we can do to jazz it up, which made him giggle. And he went, okay, well, yeah, and we sort of thought about that a little bit. And then just this last weekend, I've been speaking to a guy who's trying to help a friend who's struggling in South Africa. So I've been trying to help his friend who's in the UK to understand that he has everything that he needs to be able to help his friend. So that was probably a more an easier conversation in terms of we could explore a little bit more, because I knew he was worrying about his friend rather than worrying about himself in that moment. So we were able to sort of challenge a few ideas a little bit more, without actually potentially poking anything that we didn't want to, in terms of memories. And he just went, yeah, okay, fine, because he was stuck on thinking, well, I don't know how to help. I'm 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. I don't know how I can help him. I know sending money's not going to help him. I know that the ideas he's having probably aren't going to help him, but I don't know how I can. I said, well, just listen to him, see where that takes you, but don't worry about what you need to say to him. You don't have to have an answer. Just be calm. And by having that conversation from that point, from myself to him, that I could physically feel him calming down over the telephone, and sent him off renewed with a little bit more hope for the conversation he was going to be having with his friend again. And that's how simple it is. It's just allowing people to see things just slightly differently, that gives them the hope that they will be able to do something slightly more themselves. And it doesn't have, you don't have to have massive shifts in direction on how you see things, but just knowing that there's a small glimmer of hope means that we can come back to this conversation and see where it takes us. And you don't need to be an expert in anything. other than being a human being that's prepared to listen to another human being. And it is that simple. And therefore so powerful, because if we can break down the requirement for, oh, well, this is a big problem, so this requires an expert in this field, and there's a big waiting list for that. So the only way you're going to get seen is by getting worse and getting bumped up the waiting list to be seen. Well, if we can all help each other at the bottom level by just being able to listen to each other without worrying about it, without worrying about where that might take us and how that might play out, then we probably won't end up with massive waiting lists of people trying to see experts. And then the experts will be freed up to deal with those that might need medication to help them initially to sort of lessen the symptoms, and then help them come back down, rather than going, right, crikey, I've got 30 or 40 people in the line behind this one. I need to get this one fixed and bring the next one in. How much better would life be if we could do that for each other more readily, more of the time? And it's absolutely available and possible with a little bit of education and a little bit of an understanding of how it all hangs together. Is massively powerful.
Yeah. Dave, on that note, that just sounds like the perfect place to leave it. I know that your website is launching shortly, and we'll put that in the box beside the video once it does, and people can contact you. We'll be able to contact you through that if they're drawn to learn more about how you work or want to work with you. So thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed today. Thank you for everything you've had to say, and yes, I really wish you the best of luck working with anyone suffering from PTSD, or indeed any of the other clients that are going to be helped by you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you tonight, and for giving me this opportunity. But the things that I've learned in the last year while I went into it trying to help some friends with PTSD, I know that it can go much wider than that. And actually, as you said, it's this understanding's for everybody. It shouldn't be limited. It should be spread as far and as wide as it possibly can be. Thanks again.
Lovely. Thank you.